All right, good morning, everyone. Today's topic is probably not as exciting as some of the others. Boilerplates, biosketches, human subjects, animals, and all that jazz. So why is all of this important? Well, it is admittedly quite boring and often quite tedious, but it is absolutely required. And for any external grants, use the RAS as you can. It is their responsibility to help you with a lot of these form pages. They will fill out an awful lot. They will help you with the budget, so you don't have to be an accountant in order to get a grant. But when I get a little bit later on, you will have to help them. There's some stuff that they simply cannot do. They will help you, quote, put the package together. It is, for most granting agencies, a preset package that you have to put everything into, and then they will process it, and they're actually the ones who submit to the funding agency. Now, it is your responsibility to review it. They'll fill in all this, they'll fill in the forms, but again, you are ultimately accountable for what the final product is. So you will get a link from them saying, here, it's in our system, which is Caillou's. Go in, look it over, and approve it, make sure there's no changes. And so it really is up to you, even though they've gone through and filled things in, it is up to you to go in, read it over, and figure things out. Now, this is just an example of the NIH package, and this is the front page. And like I said, every agency is going to have something like this, but this is the most common federal one. And this is what the RAS is going to help you fill out. There are multiple pages. This is just the first one. But for example, they'll fill out the applicant information. Again, you are not the one receiving the grant. It is the university, so all that information pertains to them, as well as the person to be contacted, the type of applicant, your congressional district, all that other stuff. And again, there are numerous pages, but this is the type of stuff that the RAS is responsible for filling out. And as far as, who that contact person is, the congressional district, that kind of stuff, what I've done is I go in and simply make sure it's there. I'm assuming that if it's GA005 for the congressional district, I'm going to assume it's right, because quite frankly, I don't know. But you will know, for example, is this a new application number 8 over there, or a renewal, or a resubmission? So these are the types of things that you have to be checking out. Well, cast a character. So these, again, some of the boilerplate stuff. This is going to be who's on your grant. And it is often not a challenge, but it's a bit of finessing sometimes to decide who goes on your grant, why, and also keep in mind that part of this is not only who do you need to complete the work proposed, but who do you need to convince the reviewers that you can actually do what you're doing. So who do you put on? Well, you need relevant people with the appropriate skills and knowledge, obviously. But again, you need some people there to convince the reviewers you can do what you need to do, and that you have enough people to understand your application area. And this is where a lot of people go wrong, especially on the PhD side, leaving off the clinicians, or not consulting with the clinicians, or simply putting the clinicians on at their 2% or whatever, and then never asking them to give you feedback. Because a lot of the times the comments will come back, this is a really great engineering project, tool development, whatever, but gosh, it's the wrong clinical application. And that's, you'll drop a number of points right there. So, again, you need to convince them that you understand your application area by putting the appropriate people on. Now, there are two different types of categories of people. The key one is senior and key personnel. And this is defined by time commitment. This is not defined by their age, by the length of their CV, and so on. It is defined by the time commitment to the project, as well as, in the case of senior and key personnel, these are people that are going to contribute substantive and meaningful way to the project, whether it's in the development, the execution, so on. And this is whether or not salary is requested. So sometimes you may be including someone as, for example, a senior consultant, and you're not going to pay them because they're at your institution, but they end up being key personnel because they have that, say, clinical expertise that you're going to need. These are your PIs, your co-PIs, collaborators, and the consultants if their effort is measurable. And measurable typically is, you know, certainly greater than 5% or 5% and above. Now, there's another category called other significant contributors, and this is if their role is rather limited or they have lower expertise. So typically your postdocs, your students, technologists, your nurse coordinator, in a lot of cases your consultants are going to be in here as well. And basically it's their loss is not going to impact the project. They're replaceable. Okay, and if you want to think of it that way, your senior and key personnel are not replaceable because they're contributing something very substantive and meaningful, whereas the other ones, you know, these, again, postdocs and students. I would, however, throughout, especially with students and stuff, if you can, avoid to be determined, especially if you're going to put a lot. So if you have postdocs in mind or students in mind, get them to fill out a CV. It's a good exercise for them, and you've got nameable people there to show that you've already got, you know, your ducks lined up and you're ready to go with this project should you get funded. This is, again, one of the pages that the RAS is going to help you fill out, and this is the key personnel page. And it's going to ask you a whole bunch of information. And you are going to have to provide this information to the RAS. Some of them are more motivated than others, and they'll go out and they will go to the web page. You just have to, you know, provide them the name, and they'll try to figure all this out. But sometimes they can't, and so they may email you back and say, well, I don't know what this person is, where they are, you know, what's their email, what's their phone number. So sometimes it is your responsibility to provide this to them. They're are limited sometimes in what their capabilities are, what their time is. Then there's a whole section on this. Again, all of your key personnel will get one of these little sections, and this is where they will upload the Biosketches. We'll get to that later as well. In terms of the Biosketches, I think you've heard it a couple times, especially a couple weeks ago from Srini when he was talking about the fact that he actually had to go and create the Biosketches for some of his co-workers or co-PIs and so on. And sometimes that's absolutely true. Sometimes if the RAS has time, they will help you with this, and they will reformat as necessary. But your job really as PI is to get the Biosketches from your co-investigators, especially those at other institutions, and talk with them and make sure that they're getting it as close to the format as possible. You know, don't tell them to send you a piece of junk. That you want them to actually format or have their admins format the CVs for you, so it's not all relying on you or the RAS here. You need it for absolutely every single senior or key person on your project. And I typically recommend getting it for everybody on the project, whether they're students, postdocs. Again, it's a good exercise for them, and again, it just shows the reviewers your attention to detail that you're going to go through the effort of getting everybody's CVs, and everybody has one. You know, even your nurse coordinators, your consultants, everybody is going to need to do this. I think, again, it's very useful for these other significant people who are contributing. And unfortunately, you need to tailor the Biosketches to each submission. There are sections that will change, and you can't just keep submitting the same old CV to every single proposal, unless, of course, every single proposal is the same thing. And you need to update these. And these are killers sometimes because, believe it or not, the reviewers, this is something that they will look at, and sometimes the comments will come back. Remember, there's a category that's scored called personnel. And it's not only their qualifications, but if you have a CV from somebody that obviously hasn't been updated for 5 years, a reviewer is going to say, this CV has not been updated for 5 years. I don't know what they've been doing lately. Why are they qualified to be on the project? Same thing with not tailoring it to each submission. I've reviewed some where that introductory paragraph, which I'll show you in a minute, simply talks about some other project. And it's like, okay, you know, you're going to be euthanizing animals in this, and this project only has humans, or, you know, and so there's discrepancies. So read them carefully. And you're actually going to be utilizing some parts of this in your proposal and in your budget justification. So the Biosketches do serve multiple purposes, actually. This is the typical one. This is the NIH Biosketch, but it's used for an awful lot of agencies use this, certainly government agencies, and I know a number of private foundations will simply say submit your NIH Biosketch. This is the first part of it. This is your basic demographics, who you are, what's your commons name, what's your position, and then it asks you for your education and training, your institution, location, degree, when you completed, in your field of study. So this is the easy part. That will not change unless you get a promotion or something, and then indicate that in under position. This part stays constant. What doesn't stay constant are some of these other sections. So after you do that part, they're going to ask you to write a personal statement. And this personal statement is something that I utilize in the budget justification because, again, it's explaining who this person is, what their skills are, and what's their relevance to the project. And every now and then I'll put it somewhere in the grant as well when I'm trying to say, why is this person on my grant? Well, this is what they're going to do. So it's briefly going to describe what your role is and why you're well suited to this. And this is, again, why you as an individual have to write this, because it's often difficult for somebody else to write this about you. They can tell you what your role is, but you really have to tell them what your training is. And this kind of goes through all the types of things that you're going to put in it, and I'm going to show you a couple examples. And then you're allowed to cite 4 publications. No more, you can do less, but certainly no more than 4. That kind of highlights your general experience. And these can be kind of anything you want, but most of the time they're peer-reviewed publications. And this is just an example. I have 2 of them. This one is for how you can tailor these to different grants. This one's for an R13 for a conference grant. So I go over basically saying, a little bit about my history. I've been doing this for a long time, and what am I interested in? Medical image perception research. Then I talk about why this happened to be a grant that we're submitting on a conference where we're trying to get things, not only submissions from radiology, but other areas as well that people look at images. So I talk about, why do I think I can recruit people from other ologies in a sense? Well, because I do a lot of things in pathology, ophthalmology, and so on. And then again, since it's a conference grant, I end up there saying, hey, I've been organizing any number of grants, I put on grants, I've been on grant committees, blah, blah, blah. And then that kind of summarizes why I think I'm qualified and I'm going to be one of the organizers of this meeting. This is a personal statement for a grant where I am not a PI or a co-PI, but I'm on the grant, so it's a little bit shorter. But again, I start out saying, this is what I've been doing, how long. I've also served as a number of grants in various areas. This one did happen to be a pathology grant, so I included the pathology stuff. I highlighted my role, and then at the end I said, since I'm not the PI, well, let me tell you how I'm going to collaborate with these people, also because I'm not at the U of A anymore. So we've worked closely for a number of years. I'm going to liaise between pathology and radiology, or in this case electrical engineering, and we're going to keep in touch, regularly scheduled meetings with our collaborators, so you don't have to worry about the fact that I'm in Atlanta and they're in Tucson. So in a very short paragraph, you can describe and get across a number of key pieces of information that most people may not think of wanting to include. A lot of people just kind of say, well, I have 5,000 publications, and I'm interested in electrical engineering or biomedical engineering, but you really got to tailor it because people actually do read this part of it. Then they're going to ask you to list your positions and honors. This is sort of just general CV type stuff. So all the positions that you've held since the completion of your most recent degree. So this is not, I was a graduate assistant and so on. This is, your residency, your internship, postdocs, stuff like that, and then all your faculty positions. You can ignore the part about the high school students and undergraduates, but if you do have students on your grants, they have to list some stuff there. And then list some of your personal achievements and honors. So, for example, if you won the Nobel Prize, you might want to put it on there. But, some of the key awards, you've been an outstanding reviewer, or you won some sort of science award, RSNA poster award, and so on. Those are all good. Section C this is kind of your bragging section, and this is the hardest, but they instituted this just less than 5 years ago. It used to be just list all your publications and life was easy. This is your contributions to science, and you're allowed up to 5 of these. And it gives you about a half a page for each, including citations. And basically, it's a very brief description of what are your 5 most significant contributions to science. Now, you don't need 5. If you can't think of 5, that's fine. But you want to try for at least 3. And again, it's kind of up to you on how you want to spin this. You may say, oh my God, I only got, 15 publications. Well, put them into 5 little bins and tell them that's where your area of expertise is. It's about selling and marketing. So try to figure out, what your contributions are and what areas they are, and then you have to put a few references. This is just an example. This is the 5th one on mine. So this one again was for a telemedicine grant. So I told them, here, since 1996, so again, I've been doing this a long time. I've spent half my time in telemedicine. Why is it important? I've conducted a number of studies. And then I give them, you're allowed again, 4 publications. So I list 4. And I highlight my name in them so they can find out readily where I am. And it's a mix. You can put books in here, you can put journals, you can put posters, whatever it is you need to support the fact that you're making a contribution. And then at the end you are allowed to insert a link either to your website with all your publications, or most people just recommend Googling yourself on PubMed or Google Scholar, one of the two, and bring up all your publications and then add that link for them to follow. Some may not. But it does help. A word of caution, you are not allowed to put links to your website and so on in the body of the grant. That's cheating. You can put it in there if there's a justification. So for example, I just wrote a conference grant and I put the link to our society website. Why? Because it showed them that we are already advertising the meeting, and it gave meeting details. You cannot use a link to your website to provide information that's not in the proposal that you think is important. That they do not allow. So if you're saying, well, all the methods are here on our website, go read this, that's not allowed. That's cheating, okay? And most reviewers will not follow that link anyway. Section D is what they call additional information or your research support and or scholastic performance. And again, you can read the instructions and so on. For most people, this is going to be your research support. The scholastic performance really is for postdocs, pre-docs, and those types of folks. This is an example of one of my recent ones. So I note what the ongoing support is. They don't want dollar amounts anymore. They don't want efforts anymore. They simply want the grant number, who's the PI, what are the dates, who's funding it, and then a brief, the title, which is there in italics, and then a brief description of the grant. So the reviewers, when they're going through, can see, for example, are you already being funded for what you're proposing to do? That's really the key of this. And then I also put my pending support as well, because a lot of times that people are going to say involves, oh, well, they have overlap if they're already submitting this to some other agency. Multiple PIs. This is a relatively new mechanism, and a lot of people find this very attractive, but it's also very tricky. To do the multiple PI, you really need a defensible scientific reason to have 2 PIs. The multiple PI really is saying we are equal. We're not co-PIs. We are truly a PI doing this and then a separate PI doing that. You cannot do this just because you both want to be PIs and neither one of you is willing to give up your ego. That's not justifiable. The real reasons you're doing this is, for example, if you're multidisciplinary and each PI has a separate area of expertise that's going to run throughout the proposal. Or for some reason that the project can't be coordinated by a single person because there's major parts of it that are widely separated geographically. So for example, some of the reasons to do this, again, are you are developing some funky new type of, combination of imaging, so you're going to put MRI and optical imaging together somehow. And so you need an expert in MRI and you need an expert in optical imaging. That would be a justification. And then throughout the proposal, the development of the MR and the optical are going to follow separate trains for a while. And then aim 3, you're going to bring them together. That's the type of scientific reason for putting a multiple PI. Or you've got a project that is going to be technology development with a very strong clinical application area, with a very strong large-size clinical trial perhaps. That also would be justification for having 2 PIs, where the technology is led by the PhD and then the clinical trial aspect is run by the MD. Again, you need a clear scientific reason, and people will actually get caught up on this because you need a plan for this. And some people tend to forget the plan, and then in the plan they don't really justify it. This also has to be reflected back in your budget. So if you're going to have a multiple PI, those PIs should truly be as equal as possible. In other words, if it's a 4-year grant, both of them are on there for the full 4 years, and they're both at about the same effort. You can't simply say, well, okay, I'm going to put my clinician on as multiple PI because it's going to help them with their CV. We'll put them at 5% and I'm going to be at 50%. Boom, red flag. You both have to be at about 20% effort usually, and you really have to justify it and put in that much effort. So again, the multiple PI sounds very attractive and people like it, but it's a double-edged sword. You really have to be very careful about how you're going to do it. Human subjects, there's a box that you check, and I'll show you that page in a minute. And then within the proposal itself, you're going to have 4 sections. These are not in your page counts. These are separate sections. And you're going to basically have to, it's very similar to an IRB. You're going to have to talk about the protection of human subjects. You're going to have a data safety and monitoring plan, a section on inclusion of women and minorities, inclusion of children, noting again that the NIH changed their definition. Now it's lower than 18, not 21. And then there's an inclusion enrollment report. That's for clinical trials. I recommend actually putting it in for any grant where you're going to be doing human subjects. It just, again, tends to say that you've thought about the details and you're going to go over this. In human subject section, pay attention to details and justifications. By justifications, I mean, why are you using 200 patients? Why are you not including a control group? Why are you not including women or children? So be very careful about providing all the justifications. And remember, this is getting more critical from the IRB point of view. If you're going to be doing an observer study where you're asking your radiologist, your pathologist, or somebody to come in and read your images, a lot of IRBs and a lot of the reviewers who have institutions where they have IRBs consider them human subjects. It's not just patients. If you're running a study and you're just going to be having grad students look at images and do stuff, and perhaps score phantom images for visibility of targets because you're doing some sort of image reconstruction and you want to find out if these targets are visible, so you're going to run and observe an ROC study. Those are subjects. So again, it's not just patients who are human subjects, and it's getting more and more critical to include them in your proposal. This is the human subjects page. Again, the RAS will help you fill out, but you have to tell them all this information. So, are human subjects involved? Yes or no? If yes, then is it exempt? Or if it is exempt, then you list what the numbers are, and those exemption numbers, there's an explanation as to what they are. Number 4 is usually what most of us go for, saying we have previously collected de-identified image data that already exists in a database. If no, is IRB pending? If you have it, you put your IRB number. And then there's a section for animals there, which we'll get to in a minute. You can also list, number 3, is there proprietary or privileged information? A lot of times if you're working with companies, they will allow you to put their proprietary information in the grant under the expectation that you're going to check that box. Now technically nothing is supposed to leave the grant review committee room, and these grants are not supposed to be distributed, the reviewers aren't supposed to go and hand them out to anybody else, but this just kind of gives you, you're protecting your butt here. So if the company comes back and says, oh my God, that information got out, and you never check that box, that's their recourse to you. So make sure you check that box if there's proprietary information. Do you have any negative impact on the environment? Most of us don't. I've never seen this one checked. Are you designated somehow as a historic place? Probably not for most of us. Are there any activities outside the U.S.? Now that is very common, so that might be there. And again, this is the type of stuff that the RAS helps you with, but it does end up being incredibly important to pay attention to these details. Yeah?
So human subjects here, for this purpose, is de-identified data set would be human subjects, but then an excluded?
An exemption.
Okay, exemption.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And you're still going to have to go through the IRB process here and everything to get that exemption, but you're saying this is what I expect to get. This is the types of stuff that I include in my human subject section. It's section E, and so I give a brief overview. This was a revision, so you know, since we first submitted this, this is what happened. We got an E2 exemption in this one, and so I underlined. This was again a revision. We submitted again, and so I use underlining to say what's changed in this proposal. And then there were two aspects to this proposal. The first aspect was that we were using these de-identified data sets. But then the second aspect was, oh, we had human observers, radiologists reading these images, and then I had to go through and explain all this information. And then for each one, again, it's very much like an IRB. So what's my sample? Who are they? How many? Where are they coming from? Am I including women? Am I including minorities? And then just like an IRB, what are the risks to the subjects? So what are the subjects? What's their involvement? What's their characteristics? What are they going to do? Are they going to be imaged? Are they going to take some neuropsychological tests? And so on. Source of any materials. Am I going to be doing EKGs, MRIs, psychological tests, and so on? What are the potential risks? And be honest about that. I remember reading one in the first days of full field digital mammography, and they were talking about, well, this is going to be so good, we can just have patients just kind of sit down on a chair and we'll image them. For 20 minutes. It was some different type of system, and we're like, sitting down, x-rayed, aren't you running into some dose problems there? And you know, they lost their grant because they didn't pay attention to details here and think about, it was a great idea, but we said it was a risk to the human subjects and nerfed it. So again, adequacy of protection against these risks. What are you going to do about informed consent? How are you going to recruit? This is an interesting one, especially if you've got someone on your panel who's very concerned with women and minorities and how you're going to recruit. So that can be important. And protection against risks. What are the potential benefits for the subjects and society? Why is any of this going to be important? And then inclusion of women and minorities as separate sections. So again, this section, I've seen people kind of blow it off and really hurt their grant because this is a scorable item. People do pay attention to it. So you can lose points because you don't do a good human subject section